Good evening, everybody. This is Marty from Dawgs Blog with tonight's podcast of the Frank Carson et al. Trial. Robert Woody still on the stand. It keeps getting more interesting with Mr. Woody. If you listen to the noon report, that you'll hear that Woody is a little bit confused up there about things. And a little bit confused about things up there. Somebody's sending me messages. Hold on. You can't listen to it live until I'm live right now. Okay, so anyway, Woody's a little confused. People are still having trouble going to the podcast. So that's what somebody was just messaging you about. You got to listen to me live when I'm live at 6 o'clock. It's not like Blog Talk Radio where you can go beforehand and listen and be prepared to listen. This is one of the downfalls of this Spreaker, and there's all kinds of problems with all this stuff. There's always something that doesn't work right. No matter what I did, Blog Talk Radio was worse than this. Anyway, so Jai Gohel, this afternoon the judge gets on the bench about 1:33, and Jai Gohel addressed the court and said there may be another witness in regards to the light in the back of Poppenkork. He will confirm some information with Robert Woody and what he has seen and what was in the back lot, and make that determination a little later on. Also noted that Percy Martinez did ask that they were going to stop at noon today because Frank Carson wasn't feeling good, but Frank wanted to go on, so they went ahead and went on past noon into the afternoon session. But Frank Carson did ask to, his back has been bothering him a lot, so the judge has been allowing him to get up and stretch his back a little bit during court. And he wants to do that and stand back by right in front of the bar where the inmates come in and stuff during testimony because his back has been bothering him so much. Marlissa Ferreira did object. The judge didn't have any problems with that. The bailiff didn't have any problems with that. Marlissa Ferreira objected as to being done in front of the jury, and the judge said, you need to pick your fights. It was just one of those little things that she does just to be whatever it is she wants to be. So the jury was up at 1:38. Jai Gohel back on cross of Robert Woody. And he put a picture up on the Elmo, which is just portrays it up into the overhead screen. And it shows the back lot and the light poles in the back by the alley in the back of Poppenkork. And there's a pole there that's on the outside of the building, and it faces the lot. So in the back lot by the fence in the building, you can walk back there on the inside in the lot, and actually touch that pole. There's a pole there with a light on it. He was asking Woody if the pole was there in 2012. Of course, Woody did not recall. And he said, light? I wish there would have been a light back there. I wish it would have worked. But he didn't recall if it was there or not. He was asked when he was digging up the body in the Poppenkork. He was asked if there was odor from the body, if there was fluids running out. He did not recall, but then was reminded through a transcript that he did use some type of rag or a wet rag or something over his mouth to try to cover up the odor. He was asked about that's when they were taking the trip to the mountains and loaded up the body. He had to get some more transcript refreshed. He just doesn't remember anything. And said he did dig up the body. He loaded it up in the back of the truck. Robin Attenhofer was in the passenger seat. He was in the back. He was asked, did anybody tell him to not bring a cell phone? He did not recall. The preliminary, again, the preliminary hearing transcript, the refresh, he had to refresh his memory, and he said no one did tell him to not bring a cell phone, or he didn't have a cell phone at the time, but Robin Attenhofer or anybody else, nobody said anything about leaving the cell phones at home. He said he did not know where they're going or how to get there. They made no stops going to the mountains or coming back. They made no stops whatsoever, nothing for gas or anything. There was no stops at Baljeet Atwal's house on the way on the trip to or from. They burned the Chevy pickup, the Silverado, after the vehicle had been recovered after it was burnt. They did go to Merced to the impound where the truck was, and there was nothing further asked about that, and I don't really understand the significance of that unless I missed something. The last court date in May of 2012, that's the same day that they had gone to Frank Carson's office. That's when his charges were dismissed on the possession of stolen property beef that he had with his brother who had stolen a car. Frank Carson, he said, talked about the thefts on his property, and Robert Wood, he said, yeah, coulda. That was his response. Did he talk about the thefts on his property? Yeah, it could have. He testified that Baljeet Atwal had spot checked the property for Frank Carson. He said he was told that by Daljeet Atwal. And was his visit, he was asked if his visit to Frank Carson's office and everything that happened that day, was it real clear? And he says, correct. That's how he answered everything, correct. Sometimes he said, yeah, but it was mostly correct. But the trip to Johnson Street that same day, allegedly, that visit was a little fuzzy as he had trouble recalling it, and he had to be reminded by a neighbor and Kim Stout that he had been there. He remembered all the stops in Turlock. They went to Michael Cooley's. They went to T.J. Samra's recyclable shop looking for Cooley. He did not recall what he did later. And he also said, now remember this was in May of 2012, Bobby Atwal was driving around looking for Frank Carson's property. They never said if they found it or not, but he said Bobby Atwal acted like he didn't know where the property was. They were driving around looking for it. And finally, they had to refresh. He said he didn't recall, but he did refresh his memory with that one again, with the prelim transcript. And remember, this was May of 2012. It's 2 months after the Corey Kauffman homicide, or a month and a half, whatever you want to call it, or a little more than a month, which allegedly happened on Frank Carson's property. But they did, there was an objection to something in here. I don't know what it was. They went to a sidebar. But they did drive around to the Frank Carson property. He has given different versions and admitted that he has lied several times, like trying to impress Miranda Dykes with the story they told her on the body wire, trying to please his mother. In his original testimony with Marlissa Ferrer on direct, he was asked why would he lie, and he had said then that he afraid he would end up like Corey Kauffman. He did not recall saying that, and that was like 2 weeks ago. His testimony on direct from Marlissa Ferreira, he said he made a call from the jail to his dad and talked to Baljit Atwal because his dad was over at the Poppencork doing some work. And he said that Baljit Atwal told him to keep his mouth shut. He was asked if he knew that all jail calls were recorded, and he says, yeah, he knew that. But he was talking to Baljit Atwal, so apparently they felt that maybe he wasn't too afraid of them. During the direct testimony, he testified that prior to leaving, Baljit Atwal had a gun in his pocket. He did not recall saying that. Somebody just asked me a question, and it's probably... Yeah, somebody asked me, how could the incident on Johnson Street and Frank Carson telling them about the thefts on his property happen after Corey Kauffman went missing? I believe that could happen, actually, if they had nothing to do with it. Otherwise, they would feel they didn't have any concerns about it. Maybe that's one possibility. I don't know. They don't know anything about... and this is one of the things the defense says, that this Johnson incident happened after Corey Kauffman went missing, so how could Robert Woody make that threat? So there's a lot of confusion about this. It's not very clear, and it's a typical Robert Woody story. That's a good point. How could they go threaten Corey Kauffman? He was already missing. So he did not recall saying 2 weeks ago that Baljit Atwal had taken a gun and put it in his pocket when he left the store. And he says no. And just what he said today was no. He goes, I don't recall. And he had a funny look on his face. He says, no, not Bobby. Never saw Bobby with a gun that night. Well, that's not what he said a couple weeks ago when Marlissa was doing direct. So, Jai Gohel had no further questions at that point. Robert Woody, Percy Martinez started his cross on Robert Woody and asking him about, in February of 2014, he again talking about the confession to Miranda Dykes on the body wire, and he said, yeah, that's true. That body wire was recorded on February 18th, 2014, I believe is the date that they gave. Said he had just met Miranda Dykes at Poppencork. The first time that she had come to his house was on 2/17 in 2012, and again on 2/18 2012. Miranda Dykes was in her early 20s. They were smoking meth, and he was trying to impress her. And it was about 10 days later that he had surrendered to the district attorney's office when he had been running for about 3 days after he found out that he had a warrant. And he wanted her to think he was a tough guy. When he turned himself in, that he said he had been up for 3 days, and Kurt Bunch said they had a taped confession that was made to Miranda Dykes. Kurt Bunch played portions of that recording. He didn't play the whole recording for him. They were playing portions of the recordings. Kurt Bunch says he is convicted and gotten death penalties on less evidence than what they have here. And he was asked by Percy, how did that make you feel? And he says, well, I don't really recall. He asked him again, did he tell you you could get the death penalty? He says, I didn't recall. And he says, did you kill anybody? Percy asked him, did you kill anybody? He says, no. So what you said to Miranda Dykes was a lie. Yeah, correct. He said many lies to avoid the death sentence. And he said he was willing to lie to avoid the death sentence. He had told Miranda Dykes that he had lied before, or killed before, I'm sorry. But this is the first person actually that he had been involved in, he says now, with a homicide, was Corey Kauffman. He did, again, he was still having trouble with his memory. When Woody first took the stand this morning, I noticed that he looked like he hadn't slept all night. He was looking pretty haggard. He was looking pretty tired. He wasn't as buoyant and happy-go-lucky as he tries to put out that he is. He's tired of this whole thing, and he just doesn't have any recall. I also noticed too that every day he's wearing a different suit, and he changes at lunchtime, whatever that's worth. He was asked if Miranda Dyke was the first person that he had told about the Corey Kauffman thing, and he said yes, she was the first person that he had told Jacobson and Kurt Bunch that she was the first person, and they said that, and he was saying that Kurt Bunch and Jacobson kept telling him, and Evers too, that the first person that starts talking gets the teal. He says, well, I don't recall that. Again, refreshing with testimony. He says it did refresh his testimony. And he told his investigator, Helton, that they told him to talk to get a deal. He talked about meeting Miranda at Poppencork. He was asked if she was a street girl. He did not recall. But he did testify to the preliminary hearing that she was a street girl. Again, he did not recall. Again, they refreshed his memory with the prelim testimony. He says it does refresh his memory. He says, correct. That's what I said at the prelim. Yeah, she was off the street. Yeah, is what he said. In 2014, they were dating or kind of seeing each other. Robert Woody said she was staying over at his house a little bit. Apparently it wasn't very long, especially after the body wire. But Robert Woody said she could come and go as she pleases. He didn't want to have any control over her. So his girlfriend, Robin Attenhofer, had died 4 months prior to that. She had died of cancer. And so I guess he was just looking for a little something there. So he told her a little lie to try to impress her about killing Corey Kauffman. Kurt Bunch had him listen to parts of the audio again and said he's going to prison. His constant denials will make it worse. And Kurt Bunch kept telling him the only people that could help him were Marlissa Ferreira and Kurt Bunch. And again, talking about, he didn't recall saying that, went back to the prelim transcript, and he said, correct. Marlissa Ferreira was the only one that could help. His relationship with Bobby Atwell in 2012, he says it was all right. In the prelim, he said he had a good relationship with Bobby Atwell. He didn't recall. He was, again, refreshed. And then he said it was a pretty good relationship, and he said pretty much, yeah, all right. Atwell's tried to get him off of drugs. Percy asked him if the Atwells were trying to get him off of drugs, and he blurted out something And it just kind of came out of the blue. He says, well, they were giving him $20 a day at one time to go buy drugs. I don't know. The right up there with when he went in the gate at the Carson property in 2012, he could hear there was an incident inside the gated area. He got a little closer. Right up there with him, he could hear yelling and scuffling. But he said it wasn't that loud where anybody in the houses could hear it. Corey Kauffman was not screaming or yelling or whatever. Baljeet and Daljeet were not yelling after Daljeet had engaged also. He did not recall anybody else saying anything else. There was just some noise of a scuffle and then the gunshot. After he turned around, going to walk away, he didn't want any part of this. After he tried to play the good guy and the peacekeeper and get them off him, he was pulling them by the shirts and tried to put a stop to it. During his direct testimony prior to leaving, Baljeet Atwal had, and I'm reading something over again. He said no one was yelling, not even Corey Kauffman was yelling. Then he says he was yelling, trying to get them away and from Corey and get them to stop. He was within 5 feet and pulling on their shirts and trying to get them to stop. He also said, he asked what Corey Kauffman was wearing. He said a T-shirt. This was kind of big. He said, they've made a big issue out of this jacket that was found with the remains in the mountains that had 2 bullet holes and all these holes and stuff in it. And now that's why they're changing their theories. Many guns were used. As initially they said one gun was used. There was one bullet there that probably wasn't the murder bullet. It had somebody else's DNA on it. But he asked him, was Corey Kauffman wearing a jacket? He says, no, he wasn't wearing a jacket. That's kind of big, because that's really what they based a lot of their stuff on. He turned around, he walked away, he heard one shot. He was 40 feet away, and that's when he turned around and saw Corey Kauffman on the ground. The Atwal brothers just standing there. He did not recall if anybody was holding a flashlight. He went back to Corey Kauffman on the ground. There was blood on the back with one hole in his back. He was wearing a T-shirt. He did not recall him wearing a jacket. Only a T-shirt. And there was blood and stuff on the back of the T-shirt from the shooting. Bobby and Dee were talking what to do, and finally somebody decided what to do with the body, and somebody decided they'd put it in the pickup truck and take it to the store, to Poppencourt. He had talked to Dee when he went into the store after they'd done all their little dirty deeds and burying the body. And Dee, he said, told him to keep his effing mouth shut. He had talked to Baljeet Atwal, and he said Baljeet told him the same thing, to keep his effing mouth shut. So he just goes after burying the body and doing all this stuff, cutting the fingers and toes off, and he's had blood all over him. There's blood all over Corey's clothes, and there's he said there was blood everywhere at that time. He went back to work stocking shelves. So they started. Percy Martinez wanted to impeach Robert Woody with the preliminary testimony that he gave, where he said in a preliminary hearing, he was asked if he'd talked to Dee. He said no. Baljeet Atwal came in, and there was nothing said by either one. but now he's saying something different. That testimony was on 8/8 of 2016. He was asked if anyone had called Poppenkork on the cell phone or landline. He didn't hear any phones ring. And he didn't really recall, so they had to refresh again with a preliminary hearing transcript, and he says correct. When they said no one heard it, nobody made any calls, he didn't hear any phones ringing. He was there at Poppenkork after all this and burying the bodies, cutting the digits off and all that stuff. He was there until 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. But he really wasn't sure how long he had stayed there. Again, refreshing with the preliminary hearing transcript. He said that he had been there until about 4 a.m. He said correct. So, he was kind of close on that one. He was asked if Baljeet Atwal was at the store all night on March 30th or 31st, 2012. He said he did not recall, and Marlissa was objecting strenuously to much of this stuff, which was 99% of her constant objections were getting overruled. The next day, he arrived back at the Poppenkork at 10 a.m., noon, somewhere around there. He didn't really know. He doesn't go by a watch. He doesn't go by a calendar. So he just shows up, I guess, when he wants to show up, or they call him. He did not recall what time Baljeet Atwal had left the store the night before or that day or anything else. He goes, yeah. He doesn't know when Baljeet Atwal had came back to the store. But he had made a run later on in the afternoon or something to go pick up some supplies or something, and he was gone for some period of time. He said when they kind of bounce around, and somebody asked me about this because they go back and forth, and I give you a reading of exactly how the questions go, and sometimes it gets confusing. I know that. But that's the only way I can keep it straight because I'm really familiar with this case, and I get confused sometimes when they do things. But when that night, when the incident occurred, according to Woody, on Frank Carson's property, Daljeet had told him they had to leave, but he didn't. Again, he said he did not recall any phones ringing. And after they came back from the Carson property and did what they did with the body, he was there until 4 a.m. He did not know if Baljeet Atwal stayed until 4 a.m. They took a break. A jury went out at 3 o'clock. They came back at 3:20, which was pretty much on time. And I made a note again that Robert Woody is really looking haggard on the stand, and he's running out of patience, and he looked to me like he's getting frustrated and probably afraid he's going to lose his deal. He was asked if Baljeet Atwal had left around 1:20, 1:30 in the afternoon. He did not recall at the preliminary hearing. And that was, the night before. Let me be that clear about that. The night before, when he went to the Carson property, he said that they're asking if he was Baljeet had left at 1:20 a.m. But at the prelim, as a refresh, he said that Baljeet had left 40 to 45 minutes prior to them closing the store. He goes, yeah. And Daljeet had left to go to where Baljeet was, and he said, yeah. And he took Woody with him. Reading the transcript to refresh, he said, correct, yes, that's what happened. It was about 40, 45 minutes later that Daljeet said they had to go. And he was asked, was Corey Kauffman wearing a jacket? Again, he says, do not recall. just a few minutes ago. He says it wasn't. Again, refreshing with transcript from the prelim. He said it did refresh his memory and said there was no jacket. In the prelim, he said, yeah, he's testified there was no jacket. Corey Kauffman's not wearing a jacket. They bounced back to May of 2012 when they went to Frank Carson's office and talked about the thefts. On his last visit to Frank Carson office, and that would happen the day after or that happened the same day that he had gone to court, and Frank had gone to court and gotten his charges dismissed. He said that Frank Carson had talked about Mike Cooley and the thefts at his property. Frank Carson said, do not cause any problems. And he's said this consistently through all his statements. It's the one thing that maybe he's consistent about. That Frank Carson always said, do not cause any problems. Do not get any fights. Let him know. And Frank Carson said, I will call the police and turn this information over. He was asked if he talked to Bobby and either one of the Atwalls anytime after the homicide, about the homicide, alleged homicide. He did not recall. Prelim testimony refreshed. And he said in the prelim there was no conversations after the homicide. He went to work the next day and everything was normal from like then on. He came back in. He said it was probably before noon the next day, and he did not recall if anything was talked about the night before. He did not hear any, but he said no, he didn't recall. But he refreshed his memory, and he said nobody said anything, and he didn't hear any conversations between the Atwalls in regard to what allegedly happened the night before. He testified he dug up the body and scooped up, he said, a handful of dirt and put it inside the tarp. And there's a lot of confusion about this dirt and the tarp. There really is. And you're going to see how confusing it is. Now he's saying that he didn't put the tarp when he buried the body. He said he put some dirt inside the tarp when he buried the body. He's got some strange ideas. Like fingers and toes have the same print, so he has to take them all, and then so the body won't be identified so easily, and then he throws the fingers and toes where the body is on the scene. When he unburied the body, he put the tarp and the body in the back of the truck. He did not recall if he left the hole uncovered in the lot. He got into the cab of the truck. Baljeet Atwal was driving. Robin Attenhofer was in a passenger seat. And they went to the mountains, and they came back without stopping anywhere. He threw dirt out of the truck while coming back from the mountains. So one time he's kind of saying, well, I was in the back of the truck throwing dirt out. But he said when they went up there when he buried the body, he only had a handful of dirt in the tarp. Now he's standing in the back throwing dirt all over the place. When he's coming back, the dirt, he said, was in the tarp, and he just rolled the body out of the tarp when they got to the mountains. So the body was just in the truck with the tarp. This tarp, he said, was loose fitting, just folded over the body when he put it in there, and that's how he put it in the back of the truck when they took it out of the gravesite at Poppenkork. He says he doesn't recall putting anything on the tarp to weigh it down. But he wasn't sure. Again, he never is. again refreshed with his preliminary testimony, and he says he did not weigh it down in the prelim. He said he was disposing of the dirt that was inside the tarp. So again, he's saying that he's throwing dirt while they're going down the road. Coming back, he's throwing dirt out the truck in the roadways and off the side of the road. And when they moved the body out of the truck, they carried it with the tarp. They went about 50 feet from the roadway down this ravine in this heavily wooded area. That was done in the dark. He said there was moonlight and starlight. They had no flashlights or anything like that. They went down that steep embankment right off the road, and there's a ravine there. I've seen the pictures, and there's a ravine right off the road that goes down, and then it goes up into the tree and where all the brush and everything is. They left the body there. They kind of rolled the body out of the tarp and then kept the tarp and took it back with them. Put it back in the truck when they were done disposing of the body. He said, no real problems going down the embankment. There was no fluid. Remember, this body had been down about 20 days from March 31st or April 1st, somewhere around there, to, according to their theory date, to April 26th or 27th. I think it was the 27th. That's when they're saying, Dombey said, that's the date that they went to the mountains. That's because the date the truck had been stolen and burned. So that was, he said that Dombey was the one that said that. It wasn't him that told Dombey, and that's how that entire conversation went. It was Dombey and Jacobson telling him. He didn't recall any fluids in the bed of the truck. Remember, this body had been down about three and a half weeks. Getting the body out of the tarp, were there any fluids? He says he didn't recall any fluids in the tarp, didn't remember seeing any when he rolled the body out. And he was asked if there were any Turlock dirt that was left with the body at the scene, and he got a funny look on his face. Again, he wasn't comprehending. And was there, he's saying, was there any dirt that he had put in there from Turlock that was left at the scene? But all he said was there was some dirt that was from folding up the tarp that was left in the truck. When they're folding up the tarp after, I guess, they dumped the body. So they rolled the body out, and there was still dirt left in the tarp, because according to him. He was asked if Corey Kauffman was wearing the same clothes as he was when the shooting occurred. He said, yeah, nothing had changed. Again, there was no jacket. And he said he never saw him wearing a jacket. But he did identify some of the other clothes, like the T-shirt. He said it had an emblem on the front, and the jeans, and the boots, because he had cut the toes off and then put the boots back on. So that was it for the day. He got him to say several times, 3 or 4 times, he never saw a jacket. The big part of the DA's case, and she had a big display. Had a mannequin with a mannequin that lit up on the inside, that the jacket was on when she had the Faye Springer from the expert testified about the the bullet holes in the jacket and all that stuff. So that's why they changed their theory to the rifles, the Marlin rifle and all that stuff, because of the bullet that was underground, actually, not with the body, but underground. And the bullet had Corey Kauffman's DNA on it. It did. But the Mariposa County deputy, when she first went to the scene and gathered up everything that was there, all the evidence and the bones, and She dug under a layer of dirt to find that bullet. Dug up nowhere else to find any other bullets, just that one there. She threw the bullet and all the evidence and the clothes and the bones into one bag. It was not separated. It was not categorized. Nothing was marked on the ground. There was no flags put out. Nothing was done. To her, quote unquote, she said in the preliminary hearing, I remember distinctly saying this, that was Cherie Hendricks saying that it was just another body. Quote unquote. That's what she said. So that's why Corey Kauffman's DNA, that would explain Corey Kauffman's DNA on the bullet. It also, remember, on the bullet, there was a full DNA profile on that bullet. They never ran that profile in the database. It's called CODIS, where the DNA database that every inmate that goes to prison gets what they call a buccal swab. They take a Q-tip and swab the cheek of their mouth, and they run DNA on everybody. They never did that with that full profile that they had on that bullet. For some reason, they didn't want to know who it belonged to. I don't know what other explanation there could be. So, again, there was no jacket, and I think that's big for the defense today. Robert Woody is massively confused. He was led astray by his own family member on some of this stuff too, and we talked about that a little bit last night too. So that's where we're at. Back tomorrow with more Woody. Percy's going to may finish his cross tomorrow, if not probably Friday, and that's where we'll be at. Tom's report will be up later. He was there all day, so he's got to write a report from all day, and so don't forget that I have the donation buttons at the bottom of each post. It's through PayPal. You can send donations to my post office box. The address is on the site. I've gotten a lot of support. All I'm trying to do is pay the bills, and I'm getting the bills paid. So I'm getting a lot of support, enough support to do that, and I appreciate it. People are helping out. It doesn't take a lot. It just takes people to help out a little bit. Also, remember my sponsor I have, Merced Tile Supply, and good guy, really good guy down there, and he will help you out with your tile needs. He has good, affordable tile down there. He doesn't sell linoleum. He doesn't sell carpet or any of that stuff. Just good stuff down there. There's a video on my site of his shop and some of the things you can look at. He has some displays that I took video of too. So keep that in mind too. Got a few people there in court this morning. I tell you, to me, it was good to see. More people need to come and look at what's going on here. What's going on here is a real tragedy right now, in my opinion. They've hung their case on a poor guy that's just a meth burnout. He's 40 some odd years old and been using meth for almost 30 of those years. And I think that's kind of a shame, but this is what it's come down to. So, court's back in session. I believe they said 9:30 tomorrow. And like I always say, don't take my word for it. Come to court and find out for yourself. Good night, everybody.